The taste of copper filled Jack Graves' mouth as he pressed himself against the crumbling wall of the abandoned building. Sweat trickled down his face, mixing with the fine desert sand that seemed to coat everything in this forgotten corner of Afghanistan. His heart thundered in his chest as he gripped his M4 carbine tighter, its familiar weight doing little to calm his nerves. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Alpha Team, report status, he whispered into his comm, waiting for the familiar voices of his squad members. Static crackled in response. The silence that followed sent a chill down his spine despite the sweltering heat. The mission was supposed to be straightforward. Investigate reports of insurgent activity in a remote village, but from the moment they'd entered the area, everything had felt off. The village was empty, yet signs of recent activity were everywhere. Meals left half-eaten, doors left ajar, personal belongings scattered as if their owners had fled in panic. A sound echoed through the narrow alleyways, something between a laugh and a growl. Jack's training kicked in as he swung around, weapon raised. The shadows in the corner seemed to move independently of the setting sun's light. Contact, southeast corner. Private Miller's voice crackled through the comm, followed by the rapid staccato of gunfire. Then came the screams. Jack sprinted toward the sound, his boots kicking up dust as he rounded the corner. The sight before him defied everything he knew about warfare and reality itself. Private Miller hung suspended in the air, his rifle lying useless on the ground. The thing holding him, Jack's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. It had the general shape of a human but was nearly 8 feet tall. Its skin was the color of burned meat, and where its face should have been, there was only a mess of writhing tentacles. The creature's fingers, too long, too sharp, were buried in Miller's chest. No, Jack opened fire, the round striking the creature center mass. It turned its head toward him, seemingly more annoyed than hurt. Miller's body dropped to the ground like a discarded puppet. More shapes emerged from the shadows. Jack counted at least 5 more of the entities, each more horrific than the last. Some walked on too many legs, others seemed to phase in and out of reality like bad television reception. His rounds seemed to pass through them as if they were made of smoke. Fall back, all units, fall back, Jack shouted into his comm, but he knew it was too late. Screams echoed from different directions as his squad encountered the impossible horrors that had surrounded them. A blast of intense white light suddenly illuminated the alley, forcing Jack to shield his eyes. When he looked again, a new figure stood between him and the creatures. This one was different, feminine in form, with wings that seemed to be made of pure light. She held a sword that burned like a star. "Run, soldier," she commanded, her voice resonating with power that made his teeth vibrate. "Your weapons cannot harm them." The demons, for Jack now understood that's what they were, hissed and recoiled from the angelic figure. One lunged forward, only to be cut down by her blazing sword. The blade passed through it like a hot knife through butter, and the demon dissolved into black smoke with an otherworldly shriek. Jack wanted to stay, to fight, to help his men, but his body was moving before his mind could process the decision. As he ran, the sounds of battle echoed behind him, not the familiar pop of gunfire and explosions, but something more primal. Light and darkness clashed, and the very air seemed to tremble. He rounded another corner and slammed into something solid. Looking up, he found himself face to face with another demon. This one wore an approximation of a human face, like a mask that didn't quite fit. It smiled, revealing row upon row of needle-like teeth. The last thing Jack saw was its clawed hand reaching for his face. Then darkness claimed him. He awoke 3 days later in a military hospital in Germany. The official report stated that his squad had encountered insurgents and been ambushed. Only Jack survived, and his account of what happened was attributed to trauma and head injury. But he knew what he had seen. The images were burned into his mind. The impossible creatures, his men dying in ways that defied explanation, and the mysterious woman with wings of light who had saved his life. As he lay in his hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, a nurse entered his room. She placed a simple white card on his bedside table without a word. On it was printed a single line in elegant script. "The Order of the Veil awaits your recovery." Jack picked up the card, studying the strange symbol embossed in its corner, a sword wrapped in what appeared to be both angelic wings and demonic thorns. He didn't know it then, but this was the moment his real war would begin. The rehabilitation center sat nestled in the Swiss Alps, its modern architecture a stark contrast to the ancient mountains surrounding it. Jack stood at the window of his private room, watching snow fall softly outside. 2 months had passed since the incident in Afghanistan, but the nightmares hadn't subsided. If anything, they'd grown more vivid. A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to find a man in an impeccably tailored suit standing in the doorway. Despite his professional appearance, the man carried himself like a soldier, back straight, eyes constantly scanning, feet positioned for quick movement if necessary. "Mr. Graves," the man said, his voice carrying a slight British accent. "I'm Commander Xavier Drake. I believe you received our card." Jack studied him carefully. "The Order of the Veil. I've been doing some research, but there's surprisingly little information available." Drake smiled. "That's by design, may I?" He gestured to a chair, and Jack nodded. As Drake sat, Jack noticed a familiar symbol on his cufflink, the same one from the card. "What happened to your squad in Afghanistan wasn't an insurgent attack," Drake said without preamble. "You encountered a nest of lesser demons, specifically hollow ones. They're foot soldiers in a war that's been raging since the dawn of humanity." Jack's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. "You expect me to believe in demons?" "You already do," Drake replied. "I've read your reports multiple times, before they were officially altered, of course. You described exactly what you saw, beings that didn't move right, that bullets couldn't harm, and you saw something else, didn't you? Someone who intervened." The image of the winged woman flashed through Jack's mind. "An angel," he whispered. "Seraphine," Drake nodded. "One of the more complicated members of the heavenly host. She's been monitoring you since that day." "Why me?" Drake leaned forward. "Because you survived, Mr. Graves. More than that, you kept your sanity after witnessing something that has broken stronger men. We've been watching you for a long time, even before Afghanistan. Your childhood in Boston, for instance. The incident at your school when you were 12. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He'd never told anyone about that day, about the substitute teacher whose shadow had moved independently, who had smiled with too many teeth, about how he'd walked into class one morning and never walked out. The official report cited a gas leak and mass hallucination. "We are the Order of the Veil," Drake continued. "We've existed for centuries, keeping the balance between the divine, the infernal, and the human. We are warriors, scholars, and guardians, and we need soldiers like you, people who can see the truth and have the strength to fight it." "Fight it with what?" Jack asked. "Bullets didn't work against those things." Drake reached into his jacket and withdrew a pistol. It looked like a standard M1911, except for the strange symbols etched into its barrel and the faint blue glow emanating from its magazine well. "We have our own weapons, bullets blessed by priests, guns forged with angelic metal, blades tempered in hellfire, but more importantly, we have knowledge." He placed the gun on the table between them. "The world is bigger and darker than you ever imagined, Mr. Graves, but you've already seen that darkness. The question is, are you ready to fight it?" Jack picked up the pistol. It hummed in his hand, as if responding to his touch. Images flashed through his mind, his squad being torn apart, the demonic faces, the burning sword of Seraphine. He thought of all the other soldiers out there, facing enemies they weren't equipped to fight, dying in ways their families would never know about. "When do we start?" Drake smiled. "We already have." The next 6 months were the most intense training period of Jack's life. The Order's facility, hidden deep within the Alps, made his special forces training look like basic camp. His instructor, Marcus Blackwood, was a former Templar knight who had been fighting supernatural threats for longer than Jack had been alive. "Angels, demons, they're all energy at their core," Marcus explained during one of their training sessions. They stood in a massive underground chamber surrounded by various targets, some human-shaped, others decidedly not. Divine energy, infernal energy, it doesn't matter. Energy can be fought, contained, and if necessary, destroyed. He demonstrated by drawing a symbol in the air with his finger. The mark glowed briefly before a bolt of pure force struck one of the demon-shaped targets, reducing it to ash. The key is understanding the rules. Every entity, no matter how powerful, is bound by certain laws. Our job is to know those laws better than they do. Jack learned about the different classifications of supernatural beings. Angels weren't just angels. There were seraphs, cherubim, thrones, and dozens of other categories, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. Demons were equally diverse, from the lesser spawn they'd encountered in Afghanistan to the greater princes who could level cities with a thought. He learned to read ancient texts, to draw protective sigils, to recognize signs of supernatural activity. The Order had developed a blend of modern technology and ancient magic that gave them an edge in their secret war. His enhanced weapons could now harm supernatural entities, and his tactical gear was inscribed with protective runes. But it wasn't just about combat. Jack spent countless hours in the Order's vast library, studying theological texts and supernatural histories. He learned about the First Celestial War, when Lucifer's rebellion split the heavenly host, about the various factions among both angels and demons, and how not everything was as simple as good versus evil. Remember, Marcus told him one evening, as they sat cleaning their weapons after a particularly grueling training session, not every demon wants to destroy humanity, and not every angel wants to save it. Trust your instincts, but verify your assumptions. Jack nodded, running a blessed cloth along the barrel of his rifle. What about Seraphine, the angel who saved me? Marcus's expression grew serious. Seraphine is complicated. She's ancient, powerful, and her motives aren't always clear. Some say she's the most loyal servant of heaven, others claim she's playing her own game. The fact that she saved you is significant, but don't assume that makes her your ally. As the months passed, Jack's abilities grew. He discovered he had a natural talent for sensing supernatural entities, an ability that became stronger with training. He could feel them now, different types of energy that set his nerves on end. Angels felt like static electricity, demons like a cold weight in his stomach, and other entities had their own unique signatures. But with his growing powers came growing questions. Sometimes, during training, he would catch Marcus and Drake exchanging concerned glances when they thought he wasn't looking. There were parts of the facility he wasn't allowed to access, and conversations that stopped when he entered a room. One night, unable to sleep, he found himself in the training chamber, practicing his sigils. As he drew a particularly complex pattern in the air, the marks began to glow with an intensity he'd never achieved before. The light wasn't the usual blue of blessed energy, but a strange purple color that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. Impressive, a familiar voice said from behind him. Most humans take years to achieve that level of control. Jack spun around to find Seraphine standing there. She looked exactly as he remembered from Afghanistan, though her wings were folded away somewhere out of sight. In human form, she could have passed for a business executive, wearing a perfectly tailored white suit that seemed to shimmer slightly in the dim light. "You've been watching me," he said. It wasn't a question. "Since the day you were born," she replied. "You're special, Jack. Surely you've felt it by now, the way the energy responds to you, how quickly you've mastered techniques that should take decades to learn." "What am I?" Seraphine smiled, but there was something sad in her expression. "That's a complicated question with a dangerous answer. One that many people, and non-people, would kill to know." Before Jack could press her further, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red emergency lights flashed as Marcus's voice came over the intercom. "All personnel, battle stations. We have multiple level 3 incursions at the perimeter. This is not a drill." When Jack looked back, Seraphine was gone. In the distance, he could hear the sound of gunfire mixing with otherworldly roars. His first real battle was about to begin, and he had more questions than ever. But as he grabbed his weapons and ran toward the sound of combat, one thing was clear: he was no longer just fighting for his country or even for humanity. He was fighting for answers, and he would face whatever horror stood between him and the truth. The ancient catacombs beneath Vatican City stretched like a labyrinth of bones and secrets. Jack's boots echoed softly against stone floors that had been worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The air was thick with the musty scent of age and decay, tinged with something else, something that made his newly enhanced senses tingle with warning. Movement ahead, he whispered into his tactical comm. The device, modified by the Order's technicians, worked on frequencies that couldn't be disrupted by supernatural interference. 3 o'clock, about 30 meters. Confirmed, Marcus's voice crackled back. Remember your training. This is Azrael's territory, a corrupted guardian angel. They're stronger than demons in close quarters. Jack checked his weapons one last time. The modified P-90 submachine gun was loaded with magazines containing blessed hollow point rounds, each bullet inscribed with microscopic sigils. His backup weapon, the enchanted M1911 Drake had given him, rested in its holster, the weight of the blade strapped to his thigh. A short sword forged from melted down angel feathers provided additional comfort. The tunnel opened into a circular chamber dominated by an ancient altar. Crumbling religious icons lined the walls, their faces worn away by time, but it was the figure standing before the altar that commanded attention. Azrael had once been beautiful, that much was clear even now, but corruption had twisted that beauty into something terrible. His wings, once pure white, were now stained with patches of necrotic black. His armor, which should have shone with divine light, was tarnished and cracked, revealing pulsing darkness beneath. When he turned to face Jack, his eyes blazed with hellfire rather than heavenly grace. The Order sends children to face me now. Azrael's voice resonated with power, making the ground tremble. Your masters grow desperate. Jack raised his P-90. By the authority of the Order of the Veil, you're charged with corruption of office, unauthorized intervention in human affairs, and the murders of 17 civilians in Milan last month. The corrupted angel laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Authority. You speak of authority while serving an organization built on lies. His wings unfurled, spanning the width of the chamber. What do you know of true authority, little soldier? I stood guard over Eden. I watched your kind crawl from the mud. I know enough, Jack replied, and opened fire. The blessed rounds struck Azrael's armor, causing small explosions of light where they impacted. The angel staggered back, surprise evident on his twisted features. Most humans couldn't harm a being of his power, but Jack wasn't most humans. Azrael recovered quickly, launching himself forward with supernatural speed. His sword, a corrupted version of the heavenly weapons Jack had seen Seraphine wield, sliced through the air where Jack's head had been a moment before. Training kicked in as Jack rolled aside, switching smoothly from P-90 to his enchanted pistol. The fight that followed was unlike anything Jack had experienced in his military career. They clashed in a deadly dance of gunfire and blade work, moving faster than human eyes could follow. Azrael's corrupted powers manifested as waves of burning darkness that Jack countered with hastily drawn sigils of protection. The chamber filled with the crash of supernatural energies colliding. You're different, Azrael snarled after a particularly fierce exchange left them both breathing heavily. There's power in you, old power. What are you? Instead of answering, Jack pressed his attack. He had noticed something during their fight. Each time his blessed bullets struck Azrael's armor, the corruption spread slightly, as if the angel's own power was turning against him. It was a weakness he could exploit. Drawing the angel feather blade, Jack charged forward. Azrael met him with a downward strike that would have cleaved him in two, but Jack had anticipated the move. He slid beneath the corrupted angel's guard, blade angled upward, and thrust. The sword pierced Azrael's armor just below his heart. The angel's eyes widened in shock as divine energy, pure and uncorrupted, coursed through him from the blade. His own corruption began to consume him from the inside out. You, impossible. Azrael gasped. His form began to dissolve, corruption eating away at divine flesh. But before he disappeared completely, he locked eyes with Jack. They haven't told you the truth about what you are. Ask them. Ask them about the Nephilim project. Then he was gone, leaving behind only a scatter of corrupted feathers and the lingering smell of ozone. Jack stood in the sudden silence, his mind racing. Nephilim project. Before he could process the implications, Marcus emerged from the shadows where he had been watching the fight. Excellent work, his mentor said, but there was tension in his voice, though perhaps a bit more explosive than necessary. We'll need to clear out before the Vatican's own supernatural security arrives. What did he mean about? Jack began, but Marcus cut him off. Not here. We'll debrief back at base. For now, we need to move. There are reports of similar corruption in Moscow that require our immediate attention. As they made their way back through the catacombs, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he had just scratched the surface of something much bigger than a single corrupted angel. The way Marcus had deflected his question, the strange power he had felt during the fight, Seraphine's cryptic warnings, it all pointed to a mystery centered around his own identity. But one thing was certain, he was no longer the same soldier who had faced demons in Afghanistan. He was becoming something else, something that even angels feared. The question was, what exactly was he becoming? The neon lights of Tokyo's Shibuya district painted the rain-slick streets in a kaleidoscope of colors. Jack stood on a rooftop, watching the crowds flow below like rivers of humanity, blissfully unaware of the predator that hunted among them. His tactical gear had been exchanged for civilian clothes, but the enchanted weapons remained concealed beneath his rain jacket. Target confirmed. A voice spoke in his earpiece. Demon Prince Asmodeus has been tracked to the underground club in the red light district. Intel suggests he's meeting with human traffickers. Copy that, Jack replied, already moving across the rooftops. 3 months had passed since his encounter with Azrael in the Vatican catacombs, and he had spent that time tracking supernatural threats across the globe. Each mission brought new horrors, new challenges, and new questions about his own nature. The underground club pulsed with bass heavy music that Jack could feel in his bones. More concerning was the other vibration he felt, the distinctive signature of powerful, demonic energy. As he approached the club's entrance, a bouncer, obviously human but marked with subtle demonic sigils, tried to stop him. Jack flashed a mark on his palm, a temporary sigil that identified him as a supernatural entity. The bouncer's eyes widened, and he stepped aside quickly. Inside, the club was a maze of strobing lights and writhing bodies, but Jack's enhanced senses cut through the chaos, focusing on his target. Asmodeus had taken human form, appearing as a strikingly handsome businessman in an expensive suit. Only Jack could see the shadow he cast, a massive, twisted thing that revealed his true nature. The demon prince sat in a VIP booth, surrounded by both human criminals and lesser demons disguised as bodyguards. Well, Asmodeus smiled as Jack approached. The Order's new attack dog. I was wondering when they'd send you. Your operation ends tonight, Jack stated firmly, hand resting near his concealed weapon. The demon prince's smile widened, revealing teeth that were slightly too sharp. Are you sure about that? Do you even know what kind of operation this is? He gestured to the crowds around them. These humans come here willingly, offering their souls piece by piece in exchange for pleasure and power. It's all perfectly legal, by both human and divine law. The trafficking isn't. But can you prove I'm involved? Perhaps I'm simply a legitimate businessman attending a meeting. The Order isn't above human law, you know. You need evidence. Jack pulled out his phone, playing a recording of an earlier conversation between Asmodeus and his human associates. The demon prince's expression darkened. That's inadmissible. No human court would. This isn't a human court, Jack interrupted, and I'm not here to arrest you. The fight that followed turned the club into a war zone. As civilians fled in panic, Asmodeus revealed his true form, a towering figure of shadow and flame. His lesser demon guards transformed as well, their human disguises melting away to reveal their monstrous forms. Jack moved with practiced efficiency, his blessed weapons cutting through demon flesh. But Asmodeus was a prince of hell, far more powerful than the corrupted angel he had faced in Rome. The demon's attacks came in waves of hellfire and shadow, each blow powerful enough to shatter concrete. The battle raged through the club and into the streets of Tokyo. Jack found himself drawing on powers he didn't fully understand, his sigils glowing with that strange purple energy, his movements faster than humanly possible. But even these abilities seemed to stem from something deeper, something that made Asmodeus look at him with growing concern. "What are you?" the demon prince demanded after a particularly fierce exchange. "You're not just another order puppet. There's something old in your blood, something that shouldn't exist anymore." Before Jack could respond, a new presence entered the fight. A woman stepped out of the shadows, dark-haired, beautiful, and radiating power that made even Asmodeus take a step back. "Lilith," the demon prince growled, "this doesn't concern you. When an idiot prince risks exposing us all for the sake of profit, it concerns me," Lilith replied. Her voice was smooth as honey but carried an edge of ancient power. She turned to Jack. "Stand down, soldier. I'll handle this fool." "The Order has jurisdiction," Jack began, but Lilith cut him off. "The Order's jurisdiction ends where demon politics begin. Asmodeus has broken our laws as well as yours. He will face demon justice." What followed was a display of power that made Jack's battle seem like a schoolyard scuffle. Lilith, the first demon, moved like living darkness. She tore through Asmodeus's defenses as if they were paper, binding him with chains of pure shadow. "The old agreements still stand," she told Jack as her subordinates dragged the defeated prince away. "We police our own, just as we don't interfere with the Order's internal affairs." "And the human traffickers?" Lilith smiled, and for a moment her beautiful face shifted, revealing something ancient and terrible beneath. "They made deals with demons. That makes them our jurisdiction too. Trust me, human justice would be kinder." As she turned to leave, she paused. "You should ask your masters about your mother," she said cryptically. "Ask them why they've hidden the truth about her death. You're not what they told you are, Jack Graves." Before he could question her further, she vanished, taking Asmodeus and his minions with her. Jack was left standing in the rain-soaked streets of Tokyo, surrounded by the destruction of battle and weighted down by even more questions about his identity. His phone buzzed, another mission, this time tracking fallen angels in Moscow. But as he prepared to leave Tokyo, his mind kept returning to Lilith's words. First Azrael had mentioned the Nephilim project, and now this reference to his mother. The Order was hiding something from him, something about his own nature, and he was beginning to suspect that uncovering that truth might be the most dangerous mission of all. Moscow's abandoned churches held secrets older than the city itself. Jack moved silently through the snow-covered grounds of the Cathedral of the Fallen, its once magnificent domes now crumbling under decades of neglect. But it wasn't the physical decay that had drawn him here. It was the surge of angelic energy that pulsed from deep within the structure. "Your technique has improved," a familiar voice observed. "I barely sensed your approach." Jack spun to find Seraphine perched atop a fallen column, her wings mantled against the falling snow. In the gray Moscow light, she looked more solid, more real than she had in their previous encounters. "You've been following me since Tokyo," he stated, keeping his hand near his weapons. After his encounter with Azrael, he knew better than to fully trust any angel, no matter how helpful they appeared. "I've been following you since before you were born," she corrected, gracefully dropping to the ground. "But now it's time you understood why." The snow around them began to shift, forming patterns that resolved into images, a history written in ice crystals. Jack saw ancient battles between angels and demons, the foundation of the Order of the Veil, and glimpses of more recent events. "Before the world you know," Seraphine began, "there was a war in heaven, not the rebellion you've read about in human texts, but something older. The first celestial war began when certain angels discovered they could breed with humans, creating beings of tremendous power, the Nephilim." The snow images showed massive figures, neither fully angel nor human, wielding powers that devastated battlefields. These hybrids threatened the balance of creation itself. They were hunted down and destroyed, and new laws were put in place forbidding such unions. But some of us disagreed with this genocide. We believed the Nephilim might be necessary someday. Necessary for what? To face what's coming. Seraphine waved her hand, and the images shifted to show a darkness beyond darkness, a void that consumed light itself. There are things older than angels and demons, Jack. Things that were locked away when creation began. And now the locks are failing. A new figure appeared in the swirling snow, a woman Jack recognized from photographs, his mother. She wasn't killed in a car accident, was she? No, Seraphine's voice softened. She was one of us, a seraph who chose to fall, to become human. She fell in love with your father, knowing the consequences, knowing what you would become. The Order didn't just find you after Afghanistan, Jack. They've been watching you your entire life, guiding your development from the shadows. Jack's mind raced, pieces falling into place. His unusual abilities, the strange purple energy that accompanied his powers, the way both angels and demons reacted to him. I'm Nephilim. The last of your kind, Seraphine confirmed. Born of a fallen angel and a human, raised in secret by the Order. You're the culmination of a prophecy older than human civilization. The one who walks between realms. Before Jack could process this revelation, an explosion rocked the cathedral. Through the smoke emerged a figure Jack had seen only in Order briefings, Archangel Metatron, Heaven's voice, dressed in armor that shone like a supernova. Seraphine, Metatron's voice boomed across the courtyard. You overstep your bounds. The abomination was to remain ignorant until the appointed time. The appointed time passed when the first seal broke, Seraphine countered, her own armor materializing around her. He needs to know what he's facing. What seal? Jack demanded, drawing his weapons. What am I facing? The void entity. Metatron answered, his multiple sets of wings unfurling. The thing that existed before God spoke the first word of creation. It has been trying to return, to unmake everything. The seals that hold it back are failing, and certain parties believe a Nephilim might have the power to repair them. His burning gaze fixed on Jack. But some of us remember what happened the last time your kind wielded such power. The battle that followed made Jack's previous encounters seem like practice drills. Metatron moved with the speed of thought, his flaming sword clashing against Seraphine's twin blades, in a display of power that cracked the very air. Jack found himself caught between them, drawing on every bit of training and his newly understood heritage. His blessed rounds seemed to annoy rather than harm Metatron, but Jack noticed something interesting. When he channeled his unique purple energy through his weapons, they became far more effective. The Archangel actually had to dodge several shots, looking surprised each time. You see, Seraphine called out as she parried another of Metatron's strikes. He has the power, he can be what we need him to be. Or he could become what we feared, Metatron countered. A being powerful enough to challenge both heaven and hell. The fight ranged across the cathedral grounds, destroying ancient stonework and leaving craters in the frozen earth. Jack found himself moving with increasing confidence, his Nephilim powers responding more readily now that he understood their source. He could see the flows of energy that made up reality itself, could manipulate them in ways that neither angels nor demons could match. But Metatron was an archangel, one of heaven's most powerful warriors. A blast of divine energy sent Jack flying through a stone wall, his enhanced durability barely keeping him conscious. As he struggled to his feet, he saw Metatron standing over Seraphine, sword raised for a killing blow. Something snapped inside Jack. With a roar that shook the foundations of the cathedral, he released his power fully for the first time. Purple energy exploded from his body in waves, freezing Metatron in place. The Archangel's eyes widened as he found himself unable to move, bound by power that was neither divine nor infernal. Impossible, Metatron whispered. This level of power. Leave, Jack commanded, surprised by the resonance in his own voice. I don't serve heaven or hell. I protect humanity, and I'll find my own way to deal with this void entity. For a moment, it seemed Metatron would refuse, but another pulse of Jack's power made the Archangel reconsider. You've doomed us all, he said quietly. When the void breaks free, remember that we tried to prevent this. Then he vanished in a flash of divine light. Jack helped Seraphine to her feet. Blood leaked from a cut on her forehead, angel blood, which glowed like liquid starlight. Well, she said with a pained smile, that's one way to announce your presence to the supernatural community. Every angel and demon in existence probably felt that power surge. You knew, Jack accused. All this time, you knew what I was, what was coming. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Would you have believed me? She touched her wound, examining the glowing blood on her fingers. Besides, there are rules about these things. Prophecies have their own timing. Speaking of which, she reached into her armor and withdrew an ancient scroll, its surface covered in symbols that hurt Jack's eyes to look at. The full prophecy, she explained. About you, about the void entity, about everything. I suggest you read it somewhere safe. The Order's headquarters isn't secure anymore, not with what you've become. Where should I go? There's a sanctuary in Tibet, Seraphine replied. Built by the first Nephilim before their fall. The wards there might hide your power signature while you learn to control it. I'll meet you there in 3 days, she paused, then added. And Jack, trust no one until then, not even Marcus. With that warning, she vanished, leaving Jack alone in the ruins of the cathedral. The scroll felt warm in his hands, pulsing with ancient power. Snow continued to fall, covering the evidence of their battle, while in the distance, church bells began to toll. The sun was setting over Moscow, and with it, Jack's old life was ending too. He was no longer just a soldier, or even just an agent of the Order. He was Nephilim, a being of prophecy, caught between heaven and hell with the fate of creation hanging in the balance. And somewhere in the darkness between realities, something ancient stirred, sensing his awakening power. The void entity had waited eons for this moment, and now its time was finally coming. The Tibetan sanctuary was nothing like Jack had expected. Instead of an ancient temple complex, he found a single doorway carved into the face of a mountain, marked with symbols that matched those on the prophecy scroll. The door had no handle, no apparent mechanism, but it opened at his touch, responding to his Nephilim blood. Inside, the sanctuary defied physics. Vast chambers that couldn't possibly fit within the mountain stretched into infinity. Libraries filled with books in languages that predated human writing. Training rooms where gravity and time seemed optional. And everywhere, evidence of those who had come before. The first Nephilim, whose power had rivaled that of archangels. Jack spent 2 days exploring, learning more about his heritage from the sanctuary's records. The Nephilim hadn't been simple angel-human hybrids. They had been living bridges between realms, capable of channeling and combining energies that should have been incompatible. Their power had frightened both heaven and hell because it transcended both, drawing instead from something more fundamental. On the 3rd day, as promised, Seraphine arrived, but she wasn't alone. I'm sorry, she said, genuine pain in her voice. They followed me. Commander Drake stepped out of the shadows, flanked by Marcus and a full tactical team from the Order. They wore new armor that Jack had never seen before, covered in sigils that pulsed with harvested, angelic energy. Jack, Drake's voice was calm, reasonable. We need to talk about what happened in Moscow. You mean you need to talk about what you've been hiding from me? Jack kept his distance, noting the positions of everyone in the room. About my mother, about what I am. Everything we did was necessary, Drake insisted. You needed to develop naturally, to come into your power gradually. If we had told you the truth too soon, I'd have realized what you're really doing. Jack's hand moved to the hilt of his sword. I've been reading the sanctuary's records. About how the Order was founded, about its true purpose. You never wanted to protect humanity. You wanted to control power. Angelic, demonic, and everything in between. Drake's expression hardened. Power must be controlled, must be directed. Look what happened when the first Nephilim were allowed to roam free. They nearly tore reality apart. They were trying to stop the void entity, Jack countered. Just like they built these sanctuaries to help those who would come after them. But the Order, you've been harvesting essence from angels and demons, experimenting with powers you don't understand. Jack, Marcus stepped forward, his face troubled. Whatever you've read here, whatever Seraphine has told you, you have to understand. The world isn't as simple as heaven versus hell. The Order does what's necessary to maintain balance. Balance? Jack laughed bitterly. Is that what you call it? I found your secret files, Marcus. The containment facilities where you're holding captured angels and demons. the experiments, the attempts to artificially create more Nephilim. How many died in those attempts? A tense silence fell. Drake's hand moved to his weapon. If you've accessed those files, then you know we can't let you leave. The Sanctuary's power combined with your abilities, it's too dangerous. You want to talk about dangerous? Jack's eyes began to glow with that distinctive purple energy. I'm not the one breaking reality by harvesting divine essence. The void entity is coming because you weakened the barriers between realms. Your experiments, your harvesting, it's all accelerated the decay. The void entity is precisely why we need your power, Drake argued. Controlled, directed, under our guidance. Under your control, you mean? Jack drew his sword. Like my mother, did she really fall in love with my father, or was that part of your breeding program too? Pain flashed across Marcus's face. Jack, please, we can explain everything. I trusted you. Jack's voice cracked slightly. Both of you. I thought we were protecting humanity. We are. Drake's tone grew cold. By any means necessary, take him. The Order's tactical team moved with practiced efficiency, but they had never faced a fully awakened Nephilim in a place of power. Jack's abilities, enhanced by the Sanctuary's energy, made him nearly unstoppable. He moved like living lightning, his sword trailing purple fire as he cut through their ranks. Marcus engaged him directly, their blades meeting in a shower of sparks. Don't make me do this, Jack. You're like a son to me. Did you know? Jack demanded as they fought. About my mother, about what they did to her. The hesitation in Marcus's eyes was answer enough. Jack disarmed him with a move they had practiced countless times, sending the older man's sword spinning away. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. But the real threat was Drake. The commander had used the fight as a distraction to reach the Sanctuary's central chamber. When Jack arrived, he found Drake standing before an ancient altar, holding a device Jack had never seen before. Ingenious, what the first Nephilim built here, Drake remarked casually, as if they were having a normal conversation. A nexus point between realms, drawing power from the very foundations of reality. Imagine what the Order could do with this power. That's not what it's for, Jack warned. The Sanctuary is meant to help maintain the barriers between realms, not what? Not advance humanity's interests, not give us the power to stand equal with angels and demons. Drake activated the device, which began to pulse with stolen divine energy. You're not the only one who's been reading old records, Jack. The void entity isn't our enemy, it's our opportunity. When it breaks through, reality itself will be rewritten. The Order will be there to guide that rewriting. You're insane, Jack realized. The void entity doesn't rewrite reality, it unmakes it, returns everything to the state of pre-creation. That's the story heaven wants us to believe, Drake smiled. The same heaven that tried to exterminate the Nephilim. But you're proof that they were wrong about hybrids. Maybe they're wrong about this too. The device's pulsing grew stronger, and Jack felt reality begin to warp around them. The Sanctuary's walls rippled like water, and through them, he caught glimpses of something vast and dark moving in the spaces between spaces. Stop this, he pleaded. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, Drake replied. I'm claiming humanity's birthright, the power to reshape reality itself, and you're going to help us do it, willing or not. He pressed another button on the device and chains of pure energy shot out, trying to bind Jack, but at that moment, Seraphine appeared behind Drake, her wings blazing with light. Enough, she declared, and struck. The battle that followed would have been impossible to comprehend for human eyes. Drake wielded stolen divine power like a master, his device channeling energies that should have torn him apart. Seraphine fought with the full fury of a seraph, her true form bleeding through her human disguise, and Jack, drawing on both his training and his heritage, moved between them like a force of nature. The Sanctuary shook around them, ancient wards struggling to contain the power being unleashed. Through gaps in reality, Jack caught more glimpses of the void entity stirring, drawn by the chaos. If the fighting continued, the Sanctuary's barriers would fail completely. Making a split-second decision, Jack channeled his power into the sanctuary's foundations. Purple energy raced along the walls, activating defenses that hadn't been used since the time of the first Nephilim. Reality began to fold in on itself, preparing to transport the entire sanctuary complex to another dimension. No, Drake realized what was happening too late. His device overloaded, releasing its stored energy in a massive blast that sent everyone flying. When the dust settled, the sanctuary was gone, transported elsewhere in space and time. Only the entrance room remained, now opening onto empty mountain rock. Jack pulled himself to his feet, surveying the destruction. Drake lay unconscious, his device shattered beyond repair. Seraphine was wounded but alive, her wings dim but intact. And in the doorway stood Marcus, watching with a mixture of pride and sadness. "You did what we couldn't," the old warrior said quietly. "You chose to destroy the power rather than risk it being misused." He drew his gun, but instead of aiming it at Jack, he turned it on Drake. "Go. The order will be coming in force once they realize what's happened here. I'll hold them off as long as I can." "Marcus." "I failed you." Marcus's voice was heavy with regret. "Failed to see what the order was becoming. But maybe it's not too late to do one right thing." He managed a small smile. "Give them hell, kid." Jack wanted to say more, but alarms were already sounding in the distance. With a final nod to his mentor, he helped Seraphine to her feet, and together they fled into the gathering darkness. Behind them, gunfire echoed off the mountain walls, followed by sounds that no human weapon could make. They didn't stop running until they reached a hidden valley several miles away. As they paused to catch their breath, Seraphine turned to Jack. "The sanctuary's relocation bought us time, but the void entity grows stronger. We need allies." "The Order will have anyone sympathetic to their cause hunting us," Jack noted. "And heaven wants me dead on principle." "Then we go to the one place they won't expect." Seraphine's smile held a hint of her old mischief. "We go to hell. I hear Lilith's been wanting to talk to you anyway." Jack checked his weapons, took one last look at the mountains that had hidden such ancient secrets, and nodded. "Lead the way." "But Seraphine," she paused. "No more secrets. From now on, I need to know everything." "Everything I know, I'll share," she promised. "But Jack, some truths are worse than secrets." As if to emphasize her point, a cold wind swept through the valley, carrying with it a sound like distant laughter. Somewhere in the spaces between spaces, the void entity continued to grow stronger. The real war was just beginning, and Jack had a feeling that his trials up until now had been merely preparation for what was to come. The descent into hell wasn't what Jack expected. There were no flames, no tortured souls, no dramatic landscapes of suffering. Instead, Seraphine led him through a series of increasingly abstract spaces, each one feeling less connected to physical reality than the last. "Hell isn't a place," she explained as they walked through what appeared to be a corridor made of shifting shadows. "It's a state of being, a frequency of existence that vibrates differently from the mortal realm. What you're seeing is your mind's attempt to interpret spaces it was never meant to comprehend." Jack nodded, trying to ignore the way the shadows seemed to whisper as they passed. His Nephilim senses were overwhelmed with input, detecting layers upon layers of reality all occupying the same space. Is this how angels and demons see the world all the time? More or less, though they're better adapted to it. She paused at what looked like a doorway made of crystallized darkness. "We're here, Lilith's domain. Remember, she's not our enemy, but she's not exactly our friend either. She'll help us if she believes it serves her interests." The doorway opened onto a vast chamber that somehow managed to be both opulent and unsettling. The walls appeared to be made of polished obsidian that reflected everything except their own images. Floating orbs of dark fire provided illumination, casting shadows that moved independently of anything in the room. Lilith reclined on a throne that seemed to be carved from a single massive diamond, but closer inspection revealed it was actually crystallized angel tears, a deliberate mockery of heaven's architecture. She wore the same form Jack had seen in Tokyo, but here in her domain, the illusion of humanity was paper thin. Power radiated from her like heat from a furnace. The prodigal Nephilim returns, she smiled, showing teeth that were definitely not human, and with heaven's most notorious rebel in tow. Please, make yourselves comfortable. Well, as comfortable as anyone can be in hell. Jack remained standing, keeping his hands visible but near his weapons. You knew what I was when we met in Tokyo. You knew about my mother. I knew many things, Lilith agreed. I was there when the first Nephilim were born. I watched them grow into beings that made both angels and demons tremble, and I was there when heaven decided they were too dangerous to exist. Her expression darkened. The slaughter that followed, even by hell's standards, it was excessive. Is that why you helped me? I helped you because you're interesting, Jack Graves. A new Nephilim, born in an age when such things should be impossible. Hidden by the Order, shaped by their ambitions, yet somehow not corrupted by them. She leaned forward. But that's not why you're here, is it? The void entity, Seraphine interjected. It's breaking through. The Order's experiments weakened the barriers. Lilith's laugh cut her off. The Order? Oh, my dear naive angel, they're merely picking at scabs. The barriers were weakening long before they began their pathetic attempts at harvesting power. She waved her hand, and the obsidian walls came alive with images. Look, really look. Jack saw history unfolding across the walls, but not the history he knew. He saw the moment of creation, when light first pierced the primordial darkness. But in that same moment, he saw something else. A vast, conscious darkness that was pushed back by the light, fragmented but not destroyed. The void entity isn't trying to break into our reality, Lilith explained. It's trying to break back in. This universe was carved out of its body, a bubble of light and matter in an infinite darkness. The barriers between realms aren't just walls, they're wounds, scars from that first violent act of creation. And now those wounds are reopening, Seraphine whispered. Precisely. The Order's experiments, heaven's wars, hell's plots, they're all just fingers picking at scabs. The real problem is entropy. Reality itself is winding down, and as it does, the void entity's influence grows stronger. Jack watched as the images showed him more recent events, the subtle signs of decay that everyone had missed. Minor miracles failing, prayers going unanswered, the gradual weakening of both divine and infernal power. The first Nephilim understood this, Lilith continued. They built their sanctuaries not just as hideouts, but as repair stations, places where the barriers between realms could be reinforced. But they needed power to do it, more power than even they possessed naturally. The nexus points, Jack realized, like the one in Tibet, they weren't just sources of power, they were batteries, Lilith nodded. Collecting and storing energy that could be used to patch the walls of reality, but the Nephilim needed time to gather enough power, time that heaven's paranoia didn't give them. She rose from her throne, moving with liquid grace to stand before Jack. This close, he could see the depth of ages in her eyes, the weight of millennia of knowledge and secrets. You want to know the real reason heaven ordered the Nephilim destroyed, not because they were too powerful, but because they had discovered the truth about creation itself, about God's great work and its fundamental flaw. What flaw? Jack asked, though part of him already knew the answer. This universe was built to be perfect, eternal, unchanging, but consciousness, true consciousness, requires change, growth, free will. The moment God created beings capable of real thought and choice, entropy became inevitable. The perfect clockwork began to wind down, and in that winding down, the void entity found its way back in. The images on the walls showed the first Nephilim making this discovery, working desperately to find a solution. They had created the sanctuaries, developed ways to store and channel power, but they needed something more, a way to remake the barriers between realms without destroying free will. They were close to a solution when heaven struck. Lilith's voice held old anger, so close to finding a way to stabilize reality while preserving consciousness. Their research, their discoveries, most of it was lost in the purge. Most of it, Seraphine noted, but not all. Lilith's smile returned. Now you're asking the right questions. No, not all was lost. Some of us, demons, angels, even a few humans, preserved what we could. We've been waiting for the right moment, the right person, to continue their work. She turned to Jack. You have your mother's quick mind and your father's warrior spirit. But more importantly, you have something the first Nephilim lacked. You were born into an age of entropy, shaped by it. You understand instinctively what they had to learn through centuries of study. What do you want from me? Want? My dear boy, I want what I've always wanted. Survival. The void entity cannot be destroyed, cannot be permanently banished, but it can be reasoned with, bargained with. The first Nephilim discovered this too late. You have a chance to succeed where they failed. Bargain with it. Seraphine sounded horrified. It wants to unmake creation. It wants to reclaim what was taken from it, Lilith corrected. But perhaps there's a middle ground. A way to stabilize reality by coming to terms with the darkness it was born from, rather than constantly fighting against it. She waved her hand again, and a book materialized, ancient, bound in some material Jack couldn't identify, the combined research of the first Nephilim, preserved through ages of war and destruction, everything they learned about the true nature of reality, the void entity, and the possible solutions they never got to try. Jack reached for the book, but Lilith pulled it back slightly. Knowledge has a price, especially in hell. Are you prepared to pay it? What do you want? A promise. When you face the void entity, and you will face it, you'll remember that destruction isn't the only answer, that perhaps the greatest act of creation was flawed not because of entropy, but because it was built on an act of violence against something that was already there. Jack met her ancient gaze. I promise to consider all options, but if the void entity can't be reasoned with, then you'll do what needs to be done. Lilith nodded. That's all anyone can ask. She handed him the book. Now, let's talk about how to keep you alive long enough to make that choice. As if in response to her words, alarms began blaring throughout her domain. Not physical sounds, but psychic waves that made reality itself shudder. Heaven's forces, Seraphine's wings flared with tension. They followed us somehow. Lilith's expression darkened. No, not heaven, something worse. She waved her hand, and the obsidian walls showed them the mortal realm. Tears were appearing in the fabric of reality, dark rifts that leaked something older than darkness. The Order's actions have accelerated the decay. The void entity is pushing through ahead of schedule. How long do we have? Jack clutched the ancient book, feeling its power pulse in sync with his own. Hours, maybe days. They'll send their avatars first. Fragments of the entity that can exist in our reality. Scout forces, you might say. Lilith moved to a section of wall that split open at her touch, revealing an armory that would have made the Order envious. You'll need better weapons than those human toys. She selected a sword that seemed to be made of condensed starlight. This was wielded by one of the first Nephilim. It can cut through reality itself, useful for both fighting and quick escapes. Next came a set of armor that looked like liquid shadow given form. And this will help mask your power signature. Heaven and the Order won't be able to track you as easily. As Jack donned the new equipment, Seraphine studied the images of the rifts. They're appearing at nexus points, places where the barriers between realms are naturally thin. The same places the first Nephilim built their sanctuaries. The Tibet sanctuary was just the beginning, Jack realized. There are others. 7 in total, Lilith confirmed, each built to reinforce reality in a different way. The Order found some of them, but not all. The one in Tibet was for storing power, others were for different purposes, healing reality's wounds, communicating with the spaces between spaces, even reaching into the pre-creation void itself. The ground shook as another rift opened somewhere in the mortal realm. Even in hell, they could feel the reverberations. You need to reach the sanctuary in Egypt, Lilith said urgently. It contains the tools the first Nephilim used to communicate with the void entity, if there's any chance of negotiating with it. The Order will expect us to go there, Seraphine warned. Let them. Jack checked his new weapons, feeling the ancient power they contained. We can't afford to wait. Every minute we delay is another crack in reality. Lilith nodded approvingly. Take the hell paths, they're dangerous, but faster than traveling in the mortal realm. My servants will guide you. She paused, then added, And Jack, remember what the first Nephilim discovered. Sometimes the most dangerous path is also the only one that leads to truth. They left Lilith's domain through another crystalline doorway, following a demon guide that looked like living smoke. The hell paths twisted through impossible geometries, shortcuts through reality that bypassed normal space and time. Jack's enhanced senses could barely process what he was seeing. The book, Seraphine said as they traveled. What does it say about fighting the avatars? Jack had been scanning the ancient text as they moved. They're like fragments of pre-creation, but given purpose and form. They'll appear as voids in reality, holes in the shape of whatever fears they find in our minds. He looked up from the book. The first Nephilim found that they could be fought, but not destroyed. The best they managed was to force them back through the rifts. And the entity itself? That's more complicated. It's not evil, not really. It's just incompatible with our reality, like oil and water, but on a cosmic scale. He turned another page. The first Nephilim believed that communication was possible, but dangerous. Every attempt drove some of them mad. Their conversation was interrupted by a sound that shouldn't have been possible in the abstract spaces of the hell paths: gunfire. Order tactical teams had somehow found a way to access these forbidden routes. They're getting desperate. Seraphine's wings flared as she drew her sword, using forbidden magic to track us through hell itself. Jack readied his new weapons. They're not the only ones getting desperate. The battle that followed bent reality itself. The Order's forces had enhanced their weapons with stolen demon essence, letting them exist in these impossible spaces. But Jack's new armor and sword put him on another level entirely. He moved through the combat like a force of nature, each swing of his blade leaving tears in space that sealed themselves moments later. Seraphine fought beside him, her angelic power complementing his hybrid abilities. Together, they drove back the Order's forces, sending them tumbling off the hell paths into who knew what dimensions of reality. But during the fight, Jack noticed something troubling. Each time his sword cut through space, each time reality was torn and resealed, he caught glimpses of what lay between, the vast, patient darkness of the void entity, watching, waiting. It was learning from every interaction, every tear in the universe's fabric. They emerged from the hell paths in the Egyptian desert, miles from any human settlement. The pyramids were visible in the distance, but they weren't Jack's destination. The ancient Nephilim had hidden their sanctuary beneath the desert sands, in a place older than the pyramids themselves. There, Seraphine pointed to a seemingly random patch of desert. "Can you feel it?" Jack could. Beneath the sand lay another nexus point, humming with power that resonated with his own. But something else resonated too, a deeper vibration that made his enhanced senses scream in warning. "We're not alone," he said, just as the first avatar of the void entity emerged from a rift in reality. It was darkness given form, a hole in the world shaped like a twisted reflection of Jack's own form. Where it walked, reality cracked and splintered. And it wasn't alone. More rifts were opening, more avatars stepping through, each taking the shape of different nightmares. The entity is learning. Seraphine readied her sword. It's figured out how to push its fragments through without waiting for natural rifts to form. Jack raised his new blade, watching as it glowed in response to the proximity of the avatars. The ancient book had hinted at the true purpose of these weapons, not just to fight the darkness, but to communicate with it. Each clash of blade against void would be another exchange of information, another chance to understand what they were truly facing. "Then let's teach it something new," he said, and charged forward to meet the approaching darkness. The battle for reality's future was about to begin, and Jack finally understood why the first Nephilim had been both warriors and scholars. Sometimes, the only way to find truth was to cut through the lies reality told itself about its own creation. Above them, the desert sky began to crack, showing the ancient darkness that had waited so patiently to reclaim what it had lost. But this time, there was someone who might be able to bridge the gap between light and dark, creation and void, order and entropy. The real question was, would understanding come too late to save either side? The battle in the desert raged for what felt like hours. Jack's new sword sang as it cut through the avatars of the void entity, each strike revealing more about their nature. They weren't just mindless forces of destruction. They were probes, sensors, ways for the entity to understand the reality that had been carved from its body. The sanctuary entrance. Seraphine called out between attacks. It's right beneath us, but these avatars are somehow blocking access to the nexus point. Jack studied the movements of the void creatures as he fought them. They weren't actually trying to kill him, he realized. They were testing him, learning from each interaction, and through his Nephilim senses, he was learning too. They're not blocking it, he said suddenly. They're trying to understand it. The nexus points were built using power drawn from pre-creation itself. The entity recognizes its own energy. Drawing on instinct and the knowledge from the ancient book, Jack adjusted his fighting style. Instead of trying to destroy the avatars, he began moving in patterns that corresponded to the symbols he'd seen in the Nephilim texts. His sword left trails of light in the air, forming complex sigils. The avatars responded, their void dark forms shifting and flowing to mirror his movements. It was like a deadly dance, a conversation written in combat and energy patterns. Jack, Seraphine shouted in warning as more rifts began opening around them. But these rifts were different. Instead of more avatars, figures began stepping through. Demons led by Lilith, angels who had broken from heaven's hierarchy, and even members of the Order who had discovered the truth and turned against Drake's leadership. Among them was Marcus, bloodied but alive. Thought you could use some backup, he called out, holding a weapon that crackled with combined angelic and demonic energy. Lilith can be very persuasive when she needs allies. The expanded battle became something unprecedented. Angels, demons, humans, and a Nephilim working together against manifestations of pre-creation itself. But Jack noticed that wherever their combined powers struck the avatars, reality seemed to stabilize rather than crack further. It's the combination, he realized aloud. Heaven's light, hell's darkness, humanity's potential, my hybrid nature. Together they form a complete spectrum that the entity recognizes. It's not just about power, it's about wholeness. As if in response to this revelation, the desert sands began to shift, revealing the entrance to the Egyptian sanctuary. Unlike the Tibet complex, this one was clearly designed for communication rather than power storage. Ancient antennae of impossible metals reached toward the rifts in reality, and the walls were covered in scripts that hurt the mind to read. Inside, Lilith commanded, "We'll hold off the avatars while Jack and Seraphine reach the central chamber." The sanctuary's corridors twisted in ways that denied normal geometry, leading them deeper into spaces that existed between conventional dimensions. Jack could feel the weight of ages pressing in on them, along with something else, a vast, patient awareness that permeated everything. They reached a circular chamber dominated by a device that looked like a cross between a telescope and a radio telescope, but pointed at angles that shouldn't exist. The first Nephilim had built it to peer into the spaces between spaces, to see what existed before creation itself. "This is it," Seraphine breathed. "The device they used to first make contact with the entity, but the texts say using it drove them mad. They were trying to understand something that existed before understanding was possible," Jack said, running his hands over the ancient controls. "But I'm different. I have both the light of creation and the darkness of pre-creation in my blood." The sounds of battle echoed from above as their allies fought to buy them time. Jack began activating the device, using both his Nephilim powers and the knowledge from the ancient book to align its impossible angles. "Even if you can make contact," Seraphine warned, "there's no guarantee the entity can be reasoned with. It might not even have a concept of negotiation." "Then we'll have to teach it," Jack replied. "Just like it's been learning about our reality through its avatars, we'll help it understand why creation deserves to exist." The device hummed to life, its angles shifting in ways that made Seraphine's angelic senses recoil, but Jack stayed focused, channeling power into it while simultaneously drawing sigils in the air with his free hand. The sword Lilith had given him pulsed in response, recognizing its original purpose as more than just a weapon. Reality began to thin around them. Through the device's impossible lenses, Jack could see what the first Nephilim had seen, the true form of the void entity, a consciousness so vast it made galaxies seem like atoms. But unlike his predecessors, he didn't try to comprehend it all at once. Instead, he opened himself to a dialogue. Images flooded his mind. The moment of creation from the entity's perspective, the violent separation of light from darkness, order from chaos. He felt its pain, its confusion, its patient determination to reclaim what had been taken, but he also sensed something else. Curiosity about the things that had grown in the bubble of reality carved from its form. It doesn't hate creation, he gasped as understanding filled him. It just doesn't understand why it had to be violent. Why separation was necessary. It wants integration. Seraphine gripped his shoulder, anchoring him as more knowledge poured through the connection. The Order's experiments, she realized, their attempts to harvest and control supernatural power, they were actually making things worse by reinforcing the idea of separation and conflict. But this, Jack gestured to the allies fighting above. Angels and demons working together, different powers combining instead of opposing. It's showing another way. The ground shook as more rifts opened, but these were different. The avatars were changing form, becoming less hostile, more inquisitive. Through them, the entity was learning, understanding, considering possibilities it hadn't conceived of before. Jack's sword began to glow with a light that was neither divine nor infernal, but something more fundamental. The first Nephilim had created these weapons not to destroy, but to demonstrate, to show that light and darkness could be combined into something new. We need to call a council, he decided. Not just our immediate allies, but representatives from all factions. Heaven, hell, the Order, humanity, everyone. The entity is willing to communicate, to find a solution that doesn't require unmaking creation, but will need everyone's cooperation. A tall order, Seraphine observed dryly, getting angels and demons to sit at the same table, making heaven acknowledge it might have been wrong, convincing humans to accept the existence of a pre-creation entity. We don't have a choice. Jack activated more of the sanctuary's systems, sending pulses of energy through the nexus points that would be felt by all supernatural beings. Reality is failing. We either find a way to work together or we all cease to exist. Above them, the battle had transformed into something else. The avatars now moved among their former opponents, exchanging information instead of attacks. Angels and demons who had been enemies for millennia found themselves working together to stabilize reality where it cracked. We'll need a neutral ground for the council, Seraphine mused. Somewhere connected to all realms but not controlled by any single faction. I know just the place, Jack smiled grimly. The first sanctuary, the one that came before all others. The one place everyone thought was just a myth. Eden, Seraphine breathed, but it was destroyed in the fall. No, Jack corrected, reading from the ancient book. It was hidden. The first Nephilim found it and modified it, turned it into a meeting ground between all realms. We just need to find it again. He turned to the next chapter in the book, which detailed a series of coordinates that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. And thanks to the entity's avatars mapping the spaces between spaces, we might actually have a chance of reaching it. A new mission was taking shape. Not just fighting to preserve reality, but finding a way to heal the original wound that had started everything. It would take resources from heaven, knowledge from hell, human determination, and Nephilim adaptability. First things first, Jack said, reading through the complex instructions for locating Eden. We need to gather our forces, all of them, not just fighters, but scholars, negotiators, builders. This isn't just about stopping the end of creation anymore, it's about building something new. Seraphine nodded, her wings flaring with renewed purpose. Where do we start? We start by doing something no one has done since the first Nephilim walked the earth. Jack raised his sword, channeling power through it in a way that would be visible to every supernatural entity in existence. We call a conclave of all realms. The sword's light shot upward, piercing through dimensions, carrying with it a message that hadn't been heard in millennia. Reality itself was negotiating new terms with the darkness that birthed it. All parties were invited to the table. The war for creation's future was becoming something else entirely, a diplomatic mission on a cosmic scale. And Jack, born of both light and darkness, might be the only one who could bridge the gap between what was and what could be. As if acknowledging this new direction, the avatars of the void entity began to change form again. Instead of warriors or nightmares, they took on aspects of the first Nephilim, as if the entity was reaching back through time to resume a dialogue that had been violently interrupted. The real question was, would the various factions of creation be willing to listen this time? Finding Eden required following paths that existed in multiple realities simultaneously. The coordinates in the ancient book weren't simple numbers, but rather harmonics frequencies that resonated with the fundamental nature of creation itself. Jack had to channel his power through multiple nexus points, creating a network of energy that slowly revealed the hidden realm's location. There, he finally said, after what felt like days of searching, where all frequencies converge. Eden wasn't the garden of human myth. It was a fortress built into the very foundation of reality, a place where the original separation of light from darkness had occurred. Its walls were made of pure creation energy, and its halls existed in all realms at once: heaven, hell, earth, and the spaces between. As their gathered forces approached, angels, demons, humans, and things that defied classification, Jack could see why the first Nephilim had chosen this place. Eden stood at the exact point where all aspects of reality intersected, where the barriers between realms were meant to be permeable rather than divisive. Beautiful, Seraphine breathed, seeing it through her angelic senses. And terrible. She wasn't wrong. Eden pulsed with power that could unmake worlds, but it also held the potential for something new. The first Nephilim had modified its original structure, adding chambers and devices designed to bridge the gap between creation and pre-creation. As their allies gathered in Eden's vast central chamber, representatives from every faction began arriving. Metatron led a contingent of angels, their light barely contained by reality. Lilith brought her most powerful demon lords, their darkness roiling beneath borrowed forms. The Order's loyalist faction arrived led by Drake, who had somehow survived the Tibet sanctuary's destruction. "This is foolishness," Drake announced as soon as he saw the gathering. "The entity cannot be reasoned with. It must be destroyed, or at least contained." "Like you contained the angels and demons you harvested." Marcus stepped forward, his voice heavy with accusation. "Your experiments helped create this crisis. The least you can do is help us resolve it." Before the argument could escalate, new rifts opened in reality. The void entity's avatars emerged, but they were different now. Instead of taking forms from others' minds, they had shaped themselves into something new, beings that combined aspects of light and darkness, creation and void. Jack raised his sword, not in threat, but in greeting. The blade's glow resonated with the avatar's energy, creating harmonics that everyone present could feel. It was a language beyond words, expressing concepts that normal speech couldn't contain. "The entity is ready to talk," he announced. "But this won't be a negotiation in any normal sense. We need to show it who we are, all of us, and understand what it is in return." He turned to the gathered forces. "Every faction here has part of the truth, but none has all of it. Heaven's light, hell's darkness, humanity's potential, the Order's knowledge, even the entity's ancient awareness. We need all of it." "And how exactly do we do that?" Metatron demanded. "Some powers were never meant to combine." "That's where you're wrong." Jack walked to Eden's central altar, where the first separation of light from darkness had occurred. The first Nephilim discovered that all powers have the same source. The divisions we created, angel, demon, human, they're artificial, useful, maybe even necessary for a time, but not absolute. He began channeling power through his sword into Eden's ancient systems. The walls came alive with energy as long-dormant machinery awakened. Above them, reality itself seemed to thin, allowing glimpses of what lay beyond, the vast consciousness of the void entity, watching, waiting. Every faction must contribute, Jack continued. Not just power, but understanding. Heaven's vision of perfect order, hell's embrace of chaos and change, humanity's ability to bridge extremes, the order's accumulated knowledge, and the entity's fundamental nature. Together, they form a complete spectrum. One by one, representatives from each faction stepped forward to add their power to the growing nexus of energy. Angels and demons who had been enemies since the dawn of time found their powers harmonizing rather than conflicting. The Order's gathered knowledge provided context and structure, and through it all, the entity's avatars moved like conductors, guiding the energies into new configurations. But Drake wasn't finished. With a snarl of defiance, he activated a device he'd concealed, something built from harvested essence that threatened to destabilize the entire process. "If we can't control these powers," he shouted, "then no one should have them." The device released a pulse of corrupted energy that struck the gathered forces like a physical blow. Reality began to crack as the carefully balanced powers went wild. The entity's avatars shifted forms rapidly, responding to the chaos. Jack had a split second to make a decision. The power gathering in Eden could either repair reality's foundations or shatter them completely. Everything depended on how it was directed. Drawing on everything he had learned, his military training, his supernatural knowledge, his Nephilim heritage, and his understanding of the entity's true nature, Jack made his choice. Instead of trying to contain the wild energies, he opened himself to them completely. His Nephilim nature allowed him to channel powers that should have been incompatible. Through him, heaven's light and hell's darkness didn't fight but rather illuminated each other. The Order's knowledge found context in the entity's ancient awareness. Humanity's potential became a bridge between all extremes. "Jack, no," Seraphine cried out, recognizing what he was attempting. "No single being can contain that much power." "I'm not containing it," Jack managed through gritted teeth. "I'm completing it." The combined energies surged through him into Eden's systems, and through them into reality itself. But instead of destroying or remaking everything, the power began to heal. Cracks in reality sealed themselves. The barriers between realms didn't vanish, but became selectively permeable, allowing controlled interaction rather than rigid separation. Through his connection to the power, Jack could feel the entity's response. It recognized this new configuration, not as a threat to unmake but as an evolution of what had come before. The violent separation of creation could be healed without undoing creation itself. Drake's device overloaded and exploded, taking its creator with it. But by then, the change was already spreading. Reality stabilized, but not through force or control. Instead, a new balance emerged, one that acknowledged both the light of creation and the darkness that had preceded it. When it was over, Jack collapsed to his knees, his sword crystal cracking from the energies it had helped channel. Eden's walls still hummed with power, but it was stable now, harmonious. Lilith was the first to speak. "Well," she said with a mixture of awe and amusement, "that's certainly one way to resolve a cosmic crisis." The gathered forces began to understand what had happened. Reality hadn't been simply repaired, it had been transformed. The rigid barriers that had defined their existence for so long were now flexible, allowing for new possibilities while maintaining necessary separation. The entity's avatars took on their final form, beings that could exist in both creation and pre-creation, bridges between states of existence. They would remain as guardians and interpreters, ensuring that communication never broke down again. "So what now?" Marcus asked, looking around at the gathered forces. "Where do we go from here?" Jack stood slowly, supported by Seraphine. "Now we build something new, not perfect, not unchanging, but alive and growing. Heaven, hell, earth, and the spaces between, all connected, all necessary, all part of a greater whole." The first rays of a new dawn began to shine through Eden's crystalline walls, illuminating angels, demons, humans, and avatars alike. It wasn't an ending, Jack realized, but a beginning. The war he'd been recruited to fight had become something else entirely, a transformation that would reshape not just reality, but the very meaning of existence itself. As the gathered forces began to disperse, each returning to their realms to begin adapting to the new reality, Jack looked at the sword in his hands. The crack in its crystal blade had created a new pattern, one that combined all the energies it had channeled. "A good metaphor," Seraphine observed, following his gaze. "Some things need to be broken before they can become whole." Jack nodded, feeling the pulse of the transformed reality around them. His role as a soldier had evolved into something else. Not quite a warrior, not quite a diplomat, but something in between, just like the reality he had helped create. The true work was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, adjustments to be made, new understandings to be reached. But for the first time since the moment of creation itself, all aspects of existence were in communication rather than conflict. And somewhere in the spaces between spaces, the void entity's vast consciousness settled into a new pattern of existence, not reclaiming what was lost, but participating in what was becoming. The soldier who had once hunted angels and demons had become something more, a bridge between all aspects of reality, a guardian of a new kind of existence. And as he stood in the dawn of this new age, Jack Graves finally understood what the first Nephilim had tried to achieve so long ago. Sometimes the greatest battles aren't won by fighting, but by finding a way to make fighting unnecessary. And sometimes the most profound transformations come not from destroying what exists, but from healing the wounds that caused conflict in the first place. Eden would remain as a symbol of this new reality, not a lost paradise, but a meeting ground between all states of existence. And Jack, along with his gathered allies, would ensure that the barriers between realms never became walls again. The war was over. The real work of creation was just beginning. Epilogue: New World Order. 1 year after the events in Eden, Jack stood atop the rebuilt Tibet sanctuary, watching reality shimmer with its new harmonics. The changes they had initiated had spread throughout existence, creating a world that was both familiar and profoundly different. Angels and demons still maintained their separate realms, but there was communication now, understanding. The order had been reformed, its purpose shifted from control to coordination, and humanity, slowly but surely, was beginning to understand its place in a much larger cosmos. The entity's avatars had become a common sight, moving between realms as interpreters and guides. They no longer appeared as nightmares or warriors, but as bridges between states of existence, helping all beings understand the greater whole they were part of. Seraphine appeared beside him, her wings reflecting the new patterns of reality. "The council is gathering," she said. "Representatives from all realms, ready to discuss the next phase." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of his role as a bridge between worlds. The sword at his side had been reforged, its cracked crystal now displaying patterns that reflected the harmonious interaction of all powers. "Did we do the right thing?" he asked, not for the first time. "We did the necessary thing," she replied. "The only thing that could have worked. Perfect separation was unsustainable. Perfect unity was impossible. But this," she gestured at the shimmering reality around them, "this can grow, evolve, become more than what it was." Jack smiled, remembering how far they'd come from his first encounter with supernatural forces in Afghanistan. He was still a soldier in many ways, but his war had transformed into something else, a mission to maintain and nurture the new balance they had created. As they prepared to meet with the council, Jack caught glimpses of the future through the enhanced perceptions of his Nephilim heritage. There would be challenges ahead, adjustments to be made, new understandings to be reached. But the fundamental wound at the heart of creation had been healed, replaced with something that honored both the light and the darkness that had birthed it. The soldier who hunted angels and demons had become a guardian of a new kind of existence, and somewhere in the spaces between spaces, the void entity's vast consciousness continued to learn, to grow, to participate in the grand experiment that creation had become. It wasn't an ending, it was barely even a beginning, but it was at last whole.